We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including plenty more NHL trade rumors. We're now into the part of the offseason when many NHL insiders expect the trade market to open up and see some more activity. We have information today talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs, who appear to have shown interest in two very high-end, prominent right-shot defensemen. We'll discuss each player, how a trade could work, and how challenges may present itself to get that done. Plus, we have some other rumors around players like Jason Robertson and his future in Dallas. The Penguins have multiple players on the market. We'll discuss the fit around some of those players, including Brian Rust and Rakell, and their fit against teams like Edmonton and Ottawa, maybe being trade markets for them to end up landing in. Plus, we have some more talk around Seattle Kraken and Jared McCann. Plus, we also have word that the Jack Eichel extension talks are very much underway. We'll discuss where that might be heading. We have a couple more players announcing their retirements and some more signings today as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here in today's video, and we're going to kick things off with a couple more retirement announcements, which we seem to be getting these by the day here. As of late, longtime NHL forward Riley Nash has announced his retirement. Riley Nash was a 2007 first-round pick of the Edmonton Oilers. Never ended up playing in Edmonton, ended up being traded to Carolina before he ever made his debut, ended up playing with a bunch of other teams. Nash ended up playing for Carolina, spent a bunch of time in Boston, Columbus, Tampa, and a few other teams here as well. Ended up playing over 600 NHL games, put up 176 points. All in all, was pretty well regarded as a pretty good bottom six two-way forward, so had a pretty decent career, I must say. So Riley Nash has officially announced his retirement, of course in his mid-30s now. The other retirement announcement came today from Zach Dalpe, who's retired. He was a 2008 draft pick, also linked to Carolina. Of course, Nash, of course, like I said, was drafted by Edmonton, but made his debut with the Canes. Dalpe was drafted by the Canes in the second round in 2008. Played in a limited amount of games, 168 NHL games, put up 32 points. He last appeared for the Panthers in the NHL in the 22-23 playoffs, appearing in, I think it was 12 or 13 games and put up 1 point. So Dalpe was more of a minor leaguer. Played a lot with the Charlotte Checkers, where he finished out his career. Pretty good minor league pro guy, limited NHL exposure, but certainly made the most of his opportunities, and is now decided to hang him up and move on to the next stage of his career. So certainly like to wish Riley Nash and Zach Dalpe the best in whatever comes next for them. As I mentioned, we also have some signings here today as well. The Vancouver Canucks came to terms with their first-round pick, Braden Coots, who was taken 15th overall, signs his 3-year ELC. So, of course, with the changes now between junior hockey and the NCAA and all the eligibility requirements changing here in the past year, that'll make sure that Braden Coots does not go to college. So he will be a junior player for the remainder of his time until he reaches pro-level age. The Dallas Stars today also re-signed Antonio Stranges. He gets the 23-year-old RFA forward, gets a 1-year, 2-way deal. And the Calgary Flames have also signed Sam Morton, also a 1-year, 2-way deal. We also have another player making the jump from North America to the KHL, former Islanders and Avalanche prospect William Dufour is apparently signing a 1-year contract to play over in Russia in the KHL. Of course, William Dufour played his junior hockey with the St. John Sea Dogs, had a really solid finish to his career, got to be on the Canadian World Junior team as last year he was eligible. Had a decent start to his career with the Islanders after turning pro, but his development seemed to have stalled, and of course when they made the trade with the Avalanche for Brock Nelson, he was one of the pieces that went to the Avalanche, and the Avalanche decided not to offer him a qualifying offer, and obviously had no other options that he thought were better than heading to the KHL. So we'll see if he returns. He's still young, still a chance he develops his game and makes a jump back, but I mean, Dufour was pretty good goal scoring forward near the end of his time, but he was certainly a late blooming forward, I think, that had, you know, there was some optimism that his game would translate to the NHL level, but I know there were certainly a few concerns. I know his foot speed and skating was one of them. I know I get to see him play a handful of times in person. Pretty good player, but you know, I hoped he would make it, but one of those guys that just hasn't quite found his way just yet. We'll see if that ever happens down the road. Of course, we also got word through the 32 Thoughts podcast that came out in the last couple of days here as well. It was 3 hours long. It's taken me a while to kind of go through it all. So much information that Elliot basically emptied out his notebook, went through all 32 teams, and really spilled out all of his 32 thoughts, if you will. It's taken me a few days to kind of go through it all. But one thing he did talk about was the Vegas Golden Knights getting things kicked off on contract extension talks with top centerman Jack Eichel. Talks have begun, so they are underway. Like some of the other top players that are eligible this offseason, whether it be McDavid or Kaprizov or any of these other high-end forwards, that's not a clear-cut answer as to when they're going to get it done. I suspect sometime the goal is before training camp, ideally. A lot of players don't like to have contracts, distractions, and all that kind of negotiations weighing over them as they play, so sometimes they prefer, like we saw with a few cases last year, get it done by camp, or we just put it off until the end of the year. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Eichel and the Golden Knights are expected to reach consensus here on a pretty lucrative long-term deal. According to Elliot, the consensus, which makes sense, shouldn't surprise anybody, but it is expected to come in higher and larger than the Mitch Marner contract. I will be curious to see if he opts for an 8-year contract. Of course, the 8-year contract is going away after next year. So, it's an opportunity for some of these players that are eligible for extensions this summer. It'll be their last opportunity to do that with 7-year contract max terms if they stay with their same team, kicking in when next year's new CBA kicks in. So be curious to see how things go. The AAV, though, like I said, for Eichel, expected to exceed the $12 million from Marner, but I'll be curious to see what kind of term he opts to go with. He did an 8-year term last time. He had 8 times 10. We'll see what happens next. Clearly, Eichel, who would be the same age pretty well as McDavid, they're getting same as pretty close as Marner here as well. Like, they're all getting to that age now where they're near the end of their 20s almost. So getting an 8-year deal will pretty well take them near the end of their career. So do they want to do that, or do they want to maybe do a 3-4 year deal and then have a chance to lock in one more time at a bigger number again for the remaining years of their career? But you also have to wonder too, is you don't know how long they're going to be able to continue being such a high profile player. So, you have to factor in that, you're probably going to decrease your production a little bit into your mid to late 30s, and maybe it's better just to take the deal now while you can. So we'll see what Eichel does, but they're well on their way to getting talks going. Be curious to see where things go. Like I said, a bunch of trade information I want to take a look at today. One would be the Seattle Kraken. We know they were a busy team this offseason. They still have a player that they're very willing to move, and they actually have more than one, but the player we're going to focus on today is Jared McCann. McCann's been linked to a handful of teams. There's probably 4 or 5 teams that have been showing different levels of interest in his services, and some of these teams are not really teams that absolutely need to make a move. Like I know, like the Ottawa Senators, for example, have been linked to McCann. They've also been linked to another player we're going to talk about later, in Pittsburgh, and they don't have to make a move. I think they're content with their roster, but if they can find a deal for the right price and can make another upgrade, they'll consider that. But McCann's a player that hit 40 goals a few years ago when first got started in Seattle. His numbers are still been pretty good, but they're not quite as good as they used to be. But for what he makes on a contract, over $5 million, even if he's not a 40-goal guy, even if he's 25 to 30 goals, that's still a good contract. Heck, in today's world with the new cap and everything going up, even 20 goals is still decent for a $5 million player. So, it's kind of one of those situations where he's got a few years left on that term. For that money, it's really, not a bad deal, but ideally he's a player that really needs to play ideally in the top 6 to be able to thrive and hit some of those numbers. So I suspect that the Kraken are still having conversations. There is some word as well around a player like Jaden Schwartz I think they would consider. But considering what they've kind of accumulated there in Seattle, I don't know that they really... I'm not sure they want to move these guys for futures, right? So I'm not sure what kind of package they're looking for, but they've been very open to moving either of these players for some time. But like I said, we've had a lot of NHL insiders say after free agency, a lot of teams were still kind of not satisfied with their roster, and they expected the trade market to really open up, especially after we get the Nick Ehlers signing. And so far, we've only had the one small trade between Edmonton and Tampa with the Isaac Howard deal that went down last night. So, I mean, there's probably still a fair bit more that's out there. We know there's lots of conversations still. That seems to be very active as the rumor mill is still churning with lots of new info pretty well daily here. But, some activity would be a little bit more fun to talk about sometimes. But Seattle still has some guys out there. Hard to say if they end up getting moved or not. As I mentioned, Toronto is going to be an interesting team to watch. New information suggests that they are in on conversations on multiple prominent right shot defensemen. So I'm really starting to wonder if they may be trying to kind of not only, I know we heard about changing the DNA, but really changing how things are structured. So we saw some information suggesting that they were linked to Dougie Hamilton out of New Jersey, and apparently, according to Dave Pagnotta, they're also one of the teams that have been in on Erik Karlsson. Now, doesn't mean they're going to be able to land either one. Right now, the Leafs have just shy of $5 million in space, to 4.9. They don't have a lot of trade assets, and the players they'd like to move are not overly the most attractive to a lot of teams. Like, they'd be cap dumps. So you're looking at Kelly Yarncroke, David Kampf, to name a couple. There's some that wonder about the future of Nick Robertson. He'd still have some value, not a high-end value, because he's still a player who can play NHL games, but he hasn't been the most consistent. So, he's got some value, more than the other guys, but you're not going to get a high-end right shot defenseman for him, right? You'd have to throw in some other assets that would be more intriguing. So you're looking at future first-round picks, or, they have Easton Cowan, Ben Danford for prospects that other teams would probably like, but, again, do they really want to deplete that prospect pool cupboard? Like, it's not overly thick in there. Like, there's not a lot in the cupboard. So do you want to empty it out? I mean, it's really hard to say. So getting these deals done will be tricky. They will also need salary cap considerations by the other team, so for them to retain money. Hamilton and Karlsson are both players that are making a big ticket. Now, Hamilton has a lot longer on his contract than Karlsson does. I think Pittsburgh, though, is a completely different scenario than New Jersey, where they're kind of trying to work their way to bottom out. I think Kyle Dubas would do what he could to move Karlsson, to get off that contract, even if he means him retaining the maximum he's allowed to. I don't think the price tag for Karlsson would be as high, because I think Pittsburgh's probably looking at it like a cap dump. Now, the Devils and Dougie Hamilton, different scenario. I think in their case, they would probably prefer more of a hockey trade. I think they have a lot of defensemen, including some real good-looking young D that they want to make sure are not completely boxed out. And, obviously they're looking for a little bit of cap relief. They're probably looking for a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of a different kind of player coming back. So if they could get a forward in return for Hamilton, that might be more preferable. But, I mean, looking at their roster, it's not exactly the most clear what they might want, right? So, until we have a better idea on that, it's hard to say, but they're both challenging situations to consider. I mean, I do wonder, because we had heard that around the beginning of, right after they were eliminated and before we got to free agency, around the draft, it was expected that the Maple Leafs were going to talk to some of their players that had trade protection, including Morgan Rielly, just to see if there was any appetite to move, because if they have a full no trade, they can't really do anything without their blessing. So if they're going to block it anyway, what's the point of getting too far down that road? But I wonder, to me, I feel like they've lost confidence in Rielly, which is, to me, they're looking for a new right shot D, because I really think that they are looking for somebody who can be a power play quarterback. Because really, if you look at their team and how they're structured, I don't know that there's really anybody on that blue line that they really believe in to be that true quarterback back there to lead that power play. Because we saw what Berube did partway through the season. They changed, and they ran it a lot in the playoffs too. It's high risk, high reward to run a power play with 5 forwards. I mean, numerous times I've seen them give up shorthanded goals. All in all, the power play was still pretty successful. But now you lose Mitch Marner, who was a key piece to that 5-forward group. Do you have another forward you're willing to put out there that's going to give you the same, anywhere close to the level of offensive skill, and be responsible like Marner was defensively? It's not going to, I just don't see that format necessarily working with the makeup of this team now. It's completely different team. Marner, I'm not saying the Leafs aren't going to be good without Marner, because clearly he's one player, he's one important piece, but they still have a lot of talent there. I still think they're going to be a pretty good hockey club, and I'm sure that, like I said, a lot of these teams are not completely done making their moves, so these may not be exactly the teams we see going into the season. But to me, like I said, I think they've lost confidence in Raleigh to run a power play. You're looking at other guys they have, like an Ekman Larson, like he might be okay, but they don't really truly have that number one power play quarterback, which is why I think they're looking at some of the guys they are to hopefully be that player. So I don't know that they're, really going to be trying to bring in another high-end forward to anywhere near Mitch's level or anywhere near Mitch's salary. If they're going to spend or have another expensive player, I think they'd rather have that true number one defenseman on the back end. Now, you could argue that Erik Karlsson may not be that guy anymore, but offensively, he is still incredibly talented, and he's only got a contract for a couple of years. So if you can make it work and you can get him on your roster for, in that $5-6 million range with salary retained by Pittsburgh, there's worse things you could do, right? So, he's definitely capable of being a number one power play guy. So it's interesting to see what direction they go in here. I think they probably have an easier time pulling off a Karlsson trade than they would a Hamilton trade. Like I said, Pittsburgh might take some of your distressed assets. Like, they might take Yarncroke or they may take Kampf. Because they're not in a situation with their cap. They're not as, as in bad a shape. They're not going to care as much because they're not trying to be good. Now, of course, doesn't mean as well that they're going to just take everything. So, but they would have to take something off of the Leafs roster because, even if they took Yarncroke, let's say, and then retain money on Karlsson, the Leafs might be able to pull that off. But with Hamilton, I don't know that New Jersey's going to want to eat money on that. So we'll see. But they're linked to both players. I think they want to go with a different looking power play. I don't really think they really have true confidence that they have that right defenseman to be the true quarterback back there, and that's probably the rationale behind a lot of that thinking. So we'll see. Now, in the case of Karlsson, some other teams, and to some degree Hamilton, we've heard other teams like Utah also looking for a top high-end right shot defenseman. Dallas to some degree as well. Very challenging cap situation there. Detroit has also been linked to Karlsson as well. So we'll see where things go on those fronts. But it'd be interesting to see if Toronto pulls off a deal for either of those guys. When it comes to Jason Robertson, I know Jeff Merrick was talking about him again on his show, The Sheet, talking about how he doesn't think it's going to be too long before we have clarity on Robertson's future. Jim Nill is definitely has a number. He feels that Jim Nill likely has a number in mind that he'd be willing to go to on an extension. Definitely wouldn't be more than the Mikko Rantanen contract that they signed. If you look at the numbers and everything, I think fair to say that Rantanen probably would be the highest. It may come close to Rantanen, but it's definitely not going to be more. So depending on what the Dallas Stars have in mind there, depending on what Robertson's number is going to determine if they want to trade him or not. Because if they do trade him, like a lot of people have said, they're likely are in that case looking for a futures deal because they need to free up some space, get some prospects in the cupboard, or some picks or what have you, so that they can start working towards kind of restructuring things here a little bit. So Jason Robertson, it's hard to say right now if it's going to be a trade or an extension, but Merrick feels that extension talks are probably going on behind the scenes right now, and depending on what Robertson's kind of asks or demands are, will determine his future there. So we'll see. A couple of players in Pittsburgh that we're monitoring as well include Brian Rust and Rickard Rakell, of course, as well as Erik Karlsson too. I know when it comes to Rickard Rakell, Pittsburgh Hockey Now writer Dan Kinjerski mentions that he feels Detroit is an absolutely perfect fit. If you're looking at Detroit's roster, they definitely could use another top six forward. Right now, I wonder if a player like James Van Riemsdyk, who they signed as a cheap veteran in free agency, might end up playing in the top six, which is not good. They definitely need higher end caliber talent than that. To me, Van Riemsdyk probably should be a third line player. So, or maybe even somebody who's not even in the lineup every night, to be honest, if you're on a really good team. So we'll see. But Rakell would be a good fit in Detroit. I know the fourthperiod.com, like I said, is also linked Rakell to Ottawa. Again, like McCann, who's been linked to Ottawa. I don't know that Steve Staios and the Senators are out there actively pushing. I think they're probably more in a case, like, to me, it seems like I think they're, if anything, just kind of poking around. I think they like their lineup as it is. They're expecting a lot of internal growth from a lot of their players, take another step. They get a taste of the playoffs, and they probably feel like, players like Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Shane Pinto, Jake Sanderson, they all have another level that they can find. Ridley Gregg's another one, still pretty young. Like, if they get enough improvement out of these guys, and you got to remember, they did some heavy lifting at the deadline, getting Cousins and Zetterlund, and they'll have a full season of them. They picked up Jordan Spence to add to their blue line, another good puck mover that's got really good defensive metrics that they got from the Kings. So, it's not like they didn't do anything. They didn't do a lot. They got a new fourth-line center in Lars Eller, who's obviously very solid, experienced guy, great on face-offs, good defensively. So, in all, I think they made some minor improvements, but I think the bigger improvements came at the deadline, which a lot of people seem to forget about. So, I'm not convinced that they're actively going after McCann or Rakell, but they would be a nice complementary piece that I think would upgrade their top six. They'd probably have to move a guy like a David Perron. If they wanted to do that, it wouldn't be that difficult from a cap perspective. But again, I don't know that they want to, or they're... Well, would either of those teams take Perron for starters, and what else would they want? The prices may not line up to what they want to give up either. You got to remember that Ottawa at this point does not have a 2026 first-round pick. I know they're still hoping that the NHL changes the punishment and that they get that back for the botched issue with Dadonov's contract a few years back, which led to Pierre Dorion's firing, of course, but... I know they seem confident they're going to be able to get it reduced, but until it is, you have to bank on the fact you're not going to have that, and so they can't trade that. It would have to be a future year. It's just difficult to say what some of these players might cost. They might be better off trying to get through and be added during the season or at the deadline if they really want to upgrade before the playoffs. The other Penguin forward that's getting a lot of attention, of course, as well as Brian Rust. There's no shortage of teams interested in him. Of course, he's played a lot with Crosby over the years, has a lot of playoff experience, a lot of playoff goals. He's played a lot of big games and has come through big in a lot of big games. So, good competitor. What's not to like about him? He's not making a ton of money. He's only making $5 million as well. And if Pittsburgh's willing to retain some money, you might be able to get him even less. If they were retained 50%, you imagine getting him on your roster at $2.6 million. Not saying 100% Kyle Dubas would do that, but if they did, that would be a great addition for a lot of teams. I know I saw one article suggesting that he needs to be a player that the Edmonton Oilers are all over, and I do agree. The Oilers made the trade for Isaac Howard yesterday, so they're going to be going into the season with a pretty big expectation that young players who have either zero or next to zero NHL experience, and Isaac Howard and Matt Savoy are huge contributors to their top nine. And while in theory these kids are very talented and that should happen, what if they struggle? What if they're proven to not be as ready as they hope and think they might be? Isaac Howard dominated college hockey last year, but as a 21-year-old, if you look at the stats and you look at all the players that have won the Hobey Baker and dominated college hockey at that age, some have turned out to be really, really good NHL players. Don't get me wrong. Some have proven to be so-so or fringe players. So it's not a given that he's going to jump into the NHL and dominate. Now, he's going to be in a really good spot playing with really good players, and if he makes the adjustment well enough, he, in theory, should thrive more than a lot of players just because of the opportunity that he's going to be given. But Brian Rust would be a terrific addition. Put him on a line with Draisaitl especially. If you leave like McDavid and Hyman on your top line, if you put Draisaitl and Rust on your second line, and then you can mix in guys like Howard and like Savoy, and you can move RNH up if need be on occasion. You get Trent Frederick hopefully manning your third line. Hopefully he has a better year. You still got some bottom six players like Henrique and Janmark, and they could still have a really good team if those young guys play well and you add another veteran guy. So Brian Rust to Edmonton to me makes a ton of sense, and it shouldn't be too expensive either. So again, we'll see what happens. They already traded Sam O'Reilly though to get Howard. So the next question is going to be is not only from the money perspective, but what would they have to give Pittsburgh to get Rust? It's probably going to have to be a future first rounder or something else that they, because they're low on trading assets in that sense. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.